Daniel Mercer had always believed that no matter how broken a marriage became, a child should never have to pay the price. But on that cold Thursday evening, standing in the middle of a dimly lit gas station parking lot, he realized how wrong he had been. His 10-year-old son, now named Caleb Mercer, was sitting on the curb near pump number 4, his small hands trembling as they clutched a crumpled piece of paper. His lip was split. There was dried blood on his sleeve. One sneaker was untied, the lace dragging against the oily concrete. Daniel's heart nearly stopped when he saw him. "Caleb," he shouted, his voice cracking as he rushed forward. The boy looked up slowly, as if he wasn't sure whether what he was seeing was real. His dark eyes were swollen from crying. "Dad," Caleb whispered, disbelief and relief mixing in his voice. Daniel dropped to his knees in front of him. "What happened? Who did this to you?" Caleb tried to speak, but his voice shook too hard. Daniel gently held his face. "You're safe now. I'm here." That was when he noticed the note crushed tightly in Caleb's fist. Daniel carefully pulled it free. The words were written in familiar handwriting, his ex-wife, Marissa Cole. The message was short, sharp, and merciless. "He doesn't belong in our new life." Daniel felt the world tilt beneath him. "She left you here?" he asked softly, though he already knew the answer. Caleb nodded once, slowly, as tears slipped down his bruised cheeks. Earlier that afternoon, Caleb had been in the back seat of Marissa's SUV, pressed between boxes of groceries and his stepbrother's soccer gear. Marissa had remarried a man named Trevor Hale, and together they had built what she often called a fresh start. That fresh start, Caleb had slowly realized, did not include him. "Can you sit still?" Marissa snapped from the driver's seat when Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "You're always moving." Caleb swallowed. "Sorry, Mom." In the front passenger seat, Trevor barely looked back. "He needs to learn how to behave," Trevor muttered. "The boys don't act like this." The boys, meaning Trevor's 2 sons, who had made it clear from day one that Caleb was an outsider in their carefully arranged family. At the gas station stop, Trevor had stepped out to take a phone call. Marissa had turned around and stared at Caleb for a long moment. There was something cold in her eyes, something Caleb had never seen before. "Why can't you just fit in?" she asked quietly. Caleb blinked in confusion. "I'm trying, Mom." She shook her head. Trying isn't enough. Minutes later, shouting erupted near the air pump where Trevor's older son had shoved Caleb hard enough to send him crashing into the pavement. No one rushed to help him. No one picked him up. Instead, Caleb heard Marissa's voice, low and sharp. "This is exactly what I mean." He didn't understand then that those words would be the beginning of his abandonment. Back in the present, Daniel felt rage building inside him like a storm threatening to explode. He helped Caleb to his feet carefully. "Did they leave right after this?" Daniel asked, trying to steady his voice. Caleb hesitated before answering. "Mom said they'd come back." His voice was small, uncertain. "She said I needed time to think about how to behave better." Daniel clenched his jaw. "How long were you here?" Caleb looked toward the darkening sky. "I don't know. It was still bright when they left." Daniel checked his watch. Nearly 4 hours had passed since Marissa's SUV had been spotted leaving the station by a cashier who later called Daniel after recognizing Caleb from previous visits. Daniel wrapped his jacket around his son's shoulders. "You did nothing wrong," he said firmly. Caleb shook his head. "Trevor said I ruined things. He said Mom was happier before." Daniel swallowed hard. "Your mother's happiness is not your responsibility." Caleb finally broke down completely, burying his face into Daniel's chest. "She said I don't belong anymore." Daniel closed his eyes, fighting back tears. "You belong with me. You always have." The words felt both comforting and tragic, because Daniel had fought hard for shared custody, believing Caleb needed both parents. Now he was beginning to question that belief. Later that night at the hospital, a nurse cleaned Caleb's cuts while Daniel stood close by, refusing to leave even for a moment. "It's just bruising," the nurse assured him. "Nothing is broken." Daniel nodded but remained tense. Caleb lay quietly on the bed, staring at the ceiling. "Dad," he asked softly. "Yeah, buddy?" Daniel pulled a chair closer. Caleb hesitated before speaking. Did Mom ever love me? The question pierced through Daniel's chest. He took a slow breath. Your mother loved you when you were born. I saw it. Caleb's eyes flickered with fragile hope. Then what changed? Daniel struggled for an answer he didn't have. Sometimes adults make selfish choices. That doesn't mean you're unlovable. Caleb turned his head away. Trevor says families have to match. Daniel frowned. What does that even mean? Caleb shrugged weakly. He says I remind Mom of her old life. Silence filled the room. Daniel understood then. Caleb wasn't just unwanted. He was a reminder of a past Marissa wanted erased. Daniel leaned forward and gently brushed Caleb's hair back. Listen to me carefully, he said. You are not a mistake. You are not extra. You are not something that needs replacing. Caleb's eyes filled again, but this time with something steadier. The beginning of belief. The next morning, Daniel drove to Marissa's house with Caleb asleep in the back seat, determined to confront the situation head-on. The suburban home looked peaceful, almost picture-perfect, with trimmed hedges and children's bicycles lined neatly by the garage. Daniel rang the doorbell twice before Marissa opened it. Her expression shifted from surprise to irritation. What are you doing here? She asked sharply. Daniel stepped forward. You left our son in a parking lot. Marissa crossed her arms. He needed to understand consequences. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. He's 10 years old, Marissa. Trevor appeared behind her. Lower your voice, Trevor warned. Daniel ignored him. He was bleeding. He waited 4 hours. Marissa's face hardened. He causes problems wherever he goes. The boys feel uncomfortable. Daniel's voice shook with anger. So your solution is abandonment? She looked away for a second, then said coldly, maybe he's better off with you full-time. The words hung heavy in the air. Daniel felt something shift inside him, not just anger, but clarity. If that's what it takes to protect him, Daniel replied quietly, then yes, he will be. Behind him, Caleb stirred in the car, unaware that his life was about to change forever. Daniel did not argue further on Marissa's porch. For the first time in years, he saw that there was nothing left to salvage. I'll have my lawyer contact you, he said quietly, his voice no longer shaking. Marissa did not respond. Trevor simply closed the door. The click of the lock sounded final. When Daniel returned to the car, Caleb was awake, staring out the window at the house that had once felt like home. Were they mad? Caleb asked. Daniel started the engine slowly. No, he replied carefully. We just had an adult conversation. Caleb studied his father's face. Am I going back there next week? Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Not for now. Caleb didn't smile, but something in his shoulders relaxed. As they drove away, Daniel made a silent promise that whatever legal battle lay ahead, he would not let his son feel disposable again. The custody hearing happened faster than Daniel expected. Marissa surprised everyone by not fighting for shared custody. When the judge asked her directly, "Are you willingly agreeing to full custody transfer to Mr. Mercer?" she hesitated only briefly before saying, "Yes." Daniel glanced at her, searching for guilt or regret, but her face remained unreadable. Caleb sat beside Daniel, swinging his legs nervously. Outside the courtroom, Caleb whispered, "Does this mean she doesn't want me anymore?" Daniel knelt down to his son's level. "It means you're going to live where you're loved every day." Caleb nodded slowly. "So, here with you?" Daniel smiled gently. "Yes, here with me." For the first time in weeks, Caleb's smile reached his eyes. Adjusting to a new routine was not easy. Caleb had nightmares the first few nights. Daniel would hear him cry out and rush into his room. "They forgot me again," Caleb would mumble in his sleep. Daniel would sit on the edge of the bed and whisper, "I will never forget you." One evening over dinner, Caleb pushed his food around his plate. "Do you think Mom misses me?" he asked quietly. Daniel paused before answering. "I think she misses the idea of you," he said honestly. "But she doesn't understand how to love you the right way right now." Caleb looked thoughtful. "Is that her fault?" Daniel sighed. "It's her responsibility." The distinction mattered. Caleb slowly began to understand that adults could fail without children being to blame. Weeks later, something unexpected happened. Marissa called. Daniel stared at the phone for several seconds before answering. "What do you want?" he asked calmly. Her voice sounded softer than before. "I just wanted to know if Caleb is okay." Daniel looked across the living room where Caleb was building a model airplane. "He's healing," Daniel replied. There was silence on the other end. "Trevor thinks maybe we were too harsh," she admitted. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Too harsh," he repeated. "You left him alone and injured." Marissa inhaled shakily. "I didn't think it would go that far." Daniel's voice remained steady. "It already did." Caleb glanced up from the floor. "Is that Mom?" he whispered. Daniel nodded but covered the phone. "Do you want to talk to her?" Caleb hesitated. After a long pause, he shook his head. "Not today." Therapy became part of their weekly routine. Dr. Bennett, a calm middle-aged counselor, spoke gently to Caleb. "When someone rejects us," she explained, "it can feel like we're broken." Caleb frowned. "Am I broken?" Daniel leaned forward in his chair, but Dr. Bennett answered first. "No." "But your heart feels bruised." Caleb considered that. "Can hearts heal?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "But they need time and people who show up consistently." Caleb glanced at Daniel. "Dad shows up." Daniel swallowed hard. "Every time," he promised. Months passed, and small victories began to add up. Caleb joined a robotics club at school and made a friend named Lucas. One afternoon, he burst through the front door, excitement lighting up his face. "Dad, we won second place." Daniel laughed, pulling him into a hug. "That's amazing." Caleb grinned. Lucas said, "I'm good at fixing things." Daniel raised an eyebrow playfully. "You are." Caleb paused thoughtfully. "Maybe I can fix broken stuff." Daniel gently corrected him. "You don't have to fix everything. Some things aren't yours to repair." Caleb nodded, understanding more than his father realized. One quiet Sunday evening, Caleb found the old note tucked inside a drawer where Daniel had hidden it. He stared at the words again. "He doesn't belong in our new life." Caleb walked into the living room holding the paper. "Dad," he said softly, "can we throw this away?" Daniel looked at him carefully. "Are you ready?" Caleb nodded. Together, they stepped outside and dropped the note into the trash bin. Caleb exhaled deeply. "I belong here," he said firmly. Daniel placed an arm around his shoulders. "You always did." A year later, Daniel received another message from Marissa. This time it was a short letter. She admitted regret. She wrote about mistakes and selfishness. She asked if someday Caleb might forgive her. Daniel did not respond immediately. Instead, he showed the letter to Caleb. "It's your choice," Daniel said. Caleb read it slowly. "Do I have to answer?" he asked. "No," Daniel replied. Caleb folded the letter neatly. "Maybe when I'm older," he decided. It wasn't anger in his voice anymore. It was boundaries. Healing did not erase the past, but it reshaped it. Caleb grew taller, stronger, more confident. The gas station memory faded into something distant, no longer sharp and raw. One evening while they were cooking dinner together, Caleb looked up suddenly. "Dad." "Yeah," Daniel replied, stirring the pot. "Thank you for coming to get me that night." Daniel froze briefly before answering. "There was nowhere else I would have been." Caleb smiled. "I knew you would come." Those simple words meant more than any courtroom victory ever could. Years later, when Caleb was nearly grown, he would sometimes think back to that dark parking lot. What once felt like abandonment had become a turning point. He had not been discarded. He had been redirected. Daniel often watched his son from across the room, pride filling his chest. The boy who once asked if he was lovable now carried himself with quiet certainty. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Caleb said, "You know what? I do fit." Daniel looked at him curiously. "Where?" Caleb smiled softly. "Where I'm wanted." Daniel nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "That's what family really is." And in that peaceful silence, there was no trace of rejection left, only the steady, undeniable truth that love had chosen them both. When Caleb turned 18, The question of his mother resurfaced in a way neither he nor Daniel had expected. A certified letter arrived one afternoon with Marissa's name written carefully in the return address. Caleb held it for a long time before opening it. Daniel watched from the kitchen doorway, not interfering. Inside was a handwritten message, longer than the previous one, filled with admissions of failure and a quiet plea to meet. Marissa wrote that her marriage to Trevor had ended, that the perfect family she once tried to build had fractured under its own pressure. She wrote, "I see now that I pushed away the one person who never asked me to change who I was." Caleb read the line twice. "She wants to see me," he said finally. Daniel nodded slowly. "What do you want?" Caleb sat down, staring at the paper. "I don't know if I need her," he admitted, "but I don't want to carry anger forever." Daniel crossed the room and sat beside him. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," he said gently. "It just means you're free." Caleb thought about that for a long time. "Then maybe I'll meet her," he decided quietly. "Not because she deserves it, but because I deserve peace." The meeting took place at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. Caleb chose the location himself. He walked in alone, shoulders straight, no longer the frightened boy from the gas station. Marissa was already seated, looking smaller somehow, her confidence replaced by uncertainty. When she saw him, tears filled her eyes instantly. "Caleb," she whispered. He gave a polite nod. "Hi, Mom." The word felt strange but not painful. They sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I was building a better life. I didn't realize I was destroying something irreplaceable." Caleb listened carefully. "You didn't just hurt me," he replied calmly. "You made me think I was the problem." Marissa covered her mouth as she cried. "You were never the problem," she said. Caleb took a slow breath. "I know that now. That was the difference." He didn't need her validation anymore. "I forgive you," he continued softly. "But forgiveness doesn't rebuild what we lost." Marissa nodded through tears. "I understand." And for the first time, she truly did. When Caleb returned home, Daniel was waiting on the porch, just as he had years ago. "How did it go?" Daniel asked carefully. Caleb sat beside him, looking out at the fading sunset. "It was quiet," he said. She apologized. Daniel studied his son's face. "And?" Caleb smiled gently. "And I realized something." He looked at his father with steady eyes. "The worst day of my life led me to the best one. The day I stopped trying to fit somewhere I wasn't wanted." Daniel felt emotion rise in his chest. "You were always enough," he said. Caleb nodded. "I know." The evening air felt lighter somehow. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no grand reunion, just understanding and growth. Caleb had faced the pain, named it, and moved beyond it. As the sky turned gold and then deep blue, Daniel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "I'm proud of you." Caleb leaned back comfortably. "You taught me how to stay," he replied. And in that quiet moment, there was no bitterness left, only the solid, steady foundation of a love that had never once walked away.